Well, when I started doing sound, we record the shows on DAT tape, D-A-T. Google that if you don't know what that is. And then, later on, we started moving on to CD duplication towers, then USB key duplicators. But no matter how we get the show out, we have to record it first, and that brings up a couple of factors. So number one, is this going to be recorded for a proper record? And if so, then we'd need to record every input. So back in the day, we'd bring in a remote truck with a 2-inch multi-tracker. Nowadays, you can quite often you can record every input and go straight into a computer and capture every channel's recording. That way, you can mix down at a later point, along with overdubs and sweetening, to get a result that sounds like a record. This way of recording obviously takes a lot of time and resources. The more kind of common approach is to just record the left and right, or the main mix bus, down to a single stereo file. Obviously, this is the method of choice if you're just trying to get your product, just out there quickly. So let's look at each method. We can either record through a, say, USB cable or a Firewire cable to multitrack, which is basically recording into a computer into Pro Tools or any other DAW, or else we can just record the stereo mix out to a stereo recorder. Obviously, on the multitrack side, we have complete control afterwards of changing that mix. If we want to bring up the bass guitar, we can do that. If we want to bring down the vocals, we can do that. And we can also overdub, we can sweeten, we can add effects to each particular instrument, because everything has been recorded in multitrack. Great for post-production. But over on the stereo mix side, everything is going to be locked. That mix is going to be locked. You can't change that afterwards, any more than you can unmix a cake, right? Once everything is mixed together, you've got to be happy with that. So obviously the benefits of the two, multi-track is a little bit more of a hassle, and also you need to do some work afterwards in terms of post-production, but it gives you the most flexibility. But a stereo mix is really good if you just want a quick and dirty way of just recording everything that comes through. When you're mixing a show, you're going to set up a house mix, and then you also want to set up a stereo mix where that is going to be recorded and people can hear that show later on. But here is the conundrum that you have. If you have a number of instruments on the stage, you have all of your drums mic'd up. Let's imagine you have your bass guitar just going through a DI box. It's not going through an amp at all, but your electric guitar is going through an amp. And then you have an acoustic guitar that has a built-in pickup that's going into a DI box out to your mixer, and then you have your microphones there. So your job is you want to have a good blend of that coming through on your house mix. But here's the problem. Your drums are radiating sound off of the stage. You can hear them whether the PA is turned on or off. And same thing with your electric guitar. You can hear them both radiating off of the stage. So to make a good mix that sounds good, out in the audience, you actually need to bring down the drums and then bring down that electric guitar amp to get a proper mix. And with it set up like this, you'd actually have a good mix. It doesn't look like it's a good mix, but obviously it is a good mix because you had to bring up the bass guitar, you had to bring up the the acoustic guitar and all the microphones. But the drums and electric guitar, they're radiating off of the stage to balance out that mix. So everybody will, it'll all sound good out in the seats. But here's the problem. On the stereo mix side, you want to have a balanced mix of everything, right? You want a mix that looks like that. But look at our house mix. It's very, very different from what we would like to be recording into our stereo recorder. So we need to set up a separate mix for our stereo recorder. The best way to set up a separate mix is to use a stereo aux send. Simply set up an aux with a starting point all the same way across all of your channels. So you basically have a duplication of your main mix, and then set up some closed cup headphones and monitor the recording device that you want to get the mix from. And then you'll obviously need to bump up those instruments that are overly represented in the room that you're hearing through the air. Things like your live drums and loud guitar amps and so on. Boost them up. It actually might be counterintuitive to boost them up in the aux send, but it makes perfect sense because you've already had those sound sources like the live sounds and loud amps on stage turned down in your front of house mix. Just bump them up in that special aux mix that feeds your recorder, and all should be good. And by the way, set that aux mix to be post fader, then any changes you make to the front of house mix will be represented in that recording because they're post fader. Now, if you're sending your performance or service out to some kind of online presence, then set up that same kind of mix that we just discussed, and you'll need to merge that with your video feed from your video team. So speak to those guys there in terms of merging that. Now, one thing to consider is that you might want to include some audience mics if you want to capture the ambience of the room and the ambience of the crowd. They won't ever be fed to the front of house mix, but they really could be useful to add to your stereo recording. They can also actually be used to blend back to some of your in-ear monitor mixes on stage, because if your on-stage performers have really snug in-ear like molds, then it actually can feel quite sterile, and you can kind of feel just in your head. Just blend some of those audience mics, just hang them out here in the audience and blend some of that back into your in-ear monitors, and it makes the experience much more natural and much less isolated for your performers. So that's it. You absolutely made it. We had a lot to cover, but I hope now that you have a much clearer understanding about live sound, what it's made up of, and how it all works together. Now, if you've just started in this whole world of live sound, then I'll really encourage you just to keep learning. The tools, tend to change as time goes on, but the underlying principles, they really don't change that much. But if you want to delve deeper into any of the big subjects like EQ, compression, and mixing, I have masterclasses on each of these. Just go to our website and check them out. So I'll end this by saying thank you so much for your time. Send me pictures of you behind your console in your live sound environment. I'm just really happy to be just a small part of what you're doing locally. So my name is David Wills. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.